James Pearce Jr. and Mike Green's draft stock is plummeting after the NFL Combine. Here's the reason why. At the NFL Combine, we always find out that there's guys that have really concerning interviews during the pre-draft process. We also find out that there's serious character concerns, and there's two guys that we discovered that are going to fall and go much later than many anticipated. Who were those two guys, specifically defenders, that you think are not going to go as early as many expect?
I mean, it starts with James Pearce Jr., the edge out of Tennessee. I mean, we've been mocking him mostly over the last few months in like the top 10 to top 15 overall draft picks because he's extremely talented, Joe. 6'5 plus, 245 pounds, ran 4.47 at the Combine, right? So he's a freaky athlete. But there have been some concerns, and there's no legality issues behind a James Pearce Jr. to my knowledge. This is all of a work ethic, character stuff from the sense of, does this guy really want to be a great football player? Like, we're hearing more and more whispers, and those whispers are starting to get a whole lot louder. So some teams, I think, are going to be a little bit hesitant on him because just that general wanting to be great, being a solid and good part of a organization, I think is going to be something that's going to be continued conversation points for a James Pearce Jr. The other one's completely different, and that's Mike Green, the edge out of Marshall, that we've talked about a little bit. He's had a couple of accusations in the past, and I don't want to go deep into what those accusations are. You can Google it, and it's very, very easy to find. He had one in high school. He had another at Virginia that caused him to leave Virginia and eventually lined up at Marshall. Now, when he was at the media availability for people, he talked about those accusations in the past, and he said what he should say, right? That he is not defined by past mistakes and that the full truth is not out there and all those types of things. But I was told by several different teams that when discussing that behind the scenes in the formal visits of these incidents, a couple of teams were not overly comfortable with where those conversations were and the answers that they were potentially given. So while Mike Green may still end up going in the first round at some point, because it only takes one team, this is a falling candidate potentially if some other teams were not comfortable with what they heard in Indianapolis.
Yeah, Mike Green not properly addressing his past and the issues that he had, that I could totally see him dropping him pretty far. Like that is something that is going to be a lot more concerning. But James Pearce Jr., you do hear maybe he falls out of the first round. I feel like specifically for him, there's a good number of teams in the back end of the first round that do need edge rushers that are going to say, we're fine with this. We're fine that if we don't think he has the work ethic, we're going to try and unlock this and get the most out of him. The two, and you and I were talking about this while in Indy when we were discussing the question of his work ethic, and we were saying, the Kansas City Chiefs or the Philadelphia Eagles they're not going to sit there and let him go by. They're going to say, this guy is a freak athlete. He had one of the rarest testing days ever for an edge rusher, and he's got the film to back it up. Those teams are going to say, we've got a culture here. Maybe he doesn't lock in the way that we want, and maybe he frustrates the hell out of us. We still think we can get something out of him. Both of those teams have done that multiple times with guys, especially the Eagles, Jalen Carter, who had serious character concerns, not just an attention and a focus and a competitive standpoint, but like all the driving incidents that occurred. I think that if we get to the back 20, there's going to be plenty of teams that are going to say, we're good. We'll figure this thing out. A team that's picking in the top 15 that we've projected him to needs somebody that's fully locked in and needs him to be their premier number one pass rusher, so they can't play around with the BS.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see that very similarly. There's some that believe that he could fall out of the first round and he could fall seriously down the board. And while that might be possible, I tend to also agree with you that a organization that trusts their infrastructure and trusts themselves to be able to manage these inconsistencies or help to tutor those inconsistencies and create and hopefully get them to a passable or a plus level at some point, I think that they will be willing to take their bet on him because ultimately, after Abdul Carter, Joe, if you ask me who's the most physically gifted pass rusher in this class, it might be James Pearce Jr., right? I mean, because we can talk about Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M and the physical freak he is, but if one guy outside of Abdul ends up being a 10 to 15 sack a year guy in this class, I think it might end up being James Pearce Jr. as long as he's got his head on straight. So organization is going to matter, fit is going to matter, infrastructure is going to matter, but I do think that James Pearce Jr. is still worthy to take take a gamble on, for the lack of a better word, because he does bring some incredible athleticism and a lot of upside if you're comfortable with the character that he brings.
Folks, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our coverage going forward. We'll talk to you later.